We can hear you.
Hey, Audrey, we can hear you.
Sorry, I just responded, but I was unmuted. Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, so really all you have to do. Advancing slides, right? No, Omar's advancing his own slides, and Scott doesn't have it. Not for right now. So we have this slide, everyone is seeing this. Right over, then this will be the slide. When we're done with the study session, these are for the board meeting. Okay. That will come up with the joint board meeting slide, and then slides, and then all.
Okay. And I have my paper copy, so
Right, my son says I kept going on the chat. You just got what you solutions. James or Jimmy? Scotty or Stu? I don't know, do you like Scotty or Stu?
Hi, Pat. It's Stephen Methvin. Pat, are you out there?
I'm out here. Yep. We can.
I just want to let you know I'm sitting in for Robin Arredondo Savage for the first part of the study session, and then she's going to join us. And at that point, I will peel off.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Good to hear your voice.
You too. See you later.
Pretty obvious.
Chairman Edwards, this is Pat. It is 10 o'clock and we can begin the study session whenever you are ready.
I'm ready to go if you guys are.
We are.
Okay.
Scott, do you want to?
Yes, thank you. Welcome to all the board members and anyone else who happens to be online or listening to this study session. Today, we are going to cover a subject which has been, it's a hot subject, let's say that, and will continue to be a hot subject. And it's something that the board's asked us as biometric staff and me in particular to address and to be part of this process. The Prop 400 extension is critical because as most of us know, though for those of you who don't, we receive a great deal of funding in transit through the half-cent sales tax, which has been, which is currently imposed on anybody, any sales transaction in Maricopa County. Of this half-cent, 1/3 comes to transit and is used for operations, bus and other operations, and light rail capital. This tax expires at the end of 2025. which means that unless this tax is extended or something is extended, a revenue source which brings in millions and millions of dollars for transit services goes away. The process for creating the plan to extend this tax is handled statutorily because there is actually a law that deals only with Maricopa County through the Transportation Policy Committee, which is, although not legally, is really part of the MAG process. And MAG, through the regional council and through staff, really devises the plan, which is then approved by the regional transportation plan, which is approved by the TPC. Back when this tax was first in 2004, Valley Metro was a very, very different agency. As a matter of fact, Prop 400 is the first time that regional taxes have been applied to regional transit. So while the tax has grown, also we have changed. And I think the request to the board was, since we have changed so much, we believed it was fully appropriate for Valley Metro and the boards and the staff related transit, and since such a large portion of the tax goes to transit, to have a voice in this process, even though it is a MAG process, and rightfully so. So we've worked with MAG to provide these forums, and we've met previously and given this almost the same presentation to your transit staff through RTAG, through the city managers management group, through the RMC and TMC function, and now to you. What we're going to do is you're going to hear from both Valley Metro staff and MAG staff today. For Valley Metro, we have Omar Peters and Marty Zeke from our planning staff, who will talk about the things that they've been asked to do, and that is primarily to analyze projects that were submitted through what we call the portal, and there were well over 300 projects, transit projects submitted, and MAG asked Valley Metro to analyze these and to report back. Omar and Marty are going to give you a view of what your staff and others in the cities and the county presented or proposed and how it relates to how this plan may move forward. After they're finished, we'll hear from Audrey Kester-Thomas and John Bullen from MAG staff, who will talk about the overall program and talk about the finances related to that. And as we go through this, I hope that you can focus on a couple things, because what this brings into it makes clear is that the role of Valley Metro and this regional tax is to provide funding and allocate resources to regional transit. What we found out is that we really need to ask a very basic question before we can address the issue of the allocation, and that is, what is regional transit? What is the regional transit system? That seems like an easier question to answer than it truly is, and you'll see this through these presentations. The second thing then is that if we are to be able to describe or define what regional transit is, how do we allocate regional resources to these regional transit? So those are the two basic questions that we'll be looking at. So as we go through this discussion, keep those in the back of your mind, because I think you'll find interesting the data that is presented by both Valley Metro and MAG staff that helps to define or handle these questions. I will tell you this, at the end of this exercise, there will probably be more questions than are answers, and that's good, because hopefully we can refocus or better focus all of us, the policymakers, staff, on how we deal with this real issue and how transit fits in with what the future of funding and whatever Prop 400 extension is. So I'm going to turn it over now to Omar Peters, and he'll take it from here. So Omar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Scott, and good morning, everyone. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Scott covered a bit of this, but just as a recap again, this was our task. So we really set it to do three things. The first one is take these project submissions and map them. So really just lay out all of the data in GIS and see how the projects all fit together. So in seeing how it all fits together, really looking at see the gaps and the opportunities and seeing how we create that regional system, as Scott mentioned. And the third one is really want to take a look at assessing and get an estimate of the costs, development costs to implement these project submissions. We also specifically want to take a look at the gaps, the cost of filling those gaps. And Marty Zeke, when he presents his maps, you'll really see some of those gaps that we were mentioning. One first map we really want to start with is looking at the existing system. So what do we currently operate and fund? So this map shows the different funding sources. The purple are routes that are regionally funded, so services that are regionally funded right now. The blue are a mix of both local and regional, and the green is locally funded. So you really see kind of that mix with the majority of those routes that actually route the service lines are locally funded. We want to take a look at the ongoing costs of operating these services. So the ongoing cost of operating the blue and the purple lines is we see about at least 104 million a year. And that's really taken in just again, the blue and the purple line does not include the locally funded services, does not include state of good repair or capital costs such as fleet replacement. It also does not include rail operations and rail state of good repair. So really keeping this service going, keeping what we have right now going, looking at minimum $104 million. So getting into, again, the portal that Scott mentioned and the project submissions that we received. So we received 304 transit projects, and that's just 24% of the overall projects that was submitted. The majority, the rest of that are arterial freeway projects. 24 submissions were also on the programmatic side. So this is essentially set-asides for doing things such as operating and funding the implementation of the commuter rail system, and also think of regional bus stop improvements. So we really wanted to make sure that we also called out those 24 programmatic submissions. But we really be focusing today on the maps on those projects, so those project submissions. We really see that we can break down those 304 projects into 5 general categories. Those categories, and these will play again as Marty runs through his maps, we really broke them out into these 5 categories. The first on the left is really just improving what we have right now, so making frequency improvement to bus routes, increasing the span of service, so how long those services run, and doing bus route extensions. The purple, new services, so that's a new park and ride, a new route and such. State of good repair, pretty self-explanatory, just keeping what we have right now in a good operating and safe conditions. We really wanted to call out the new technologies and service types. So that blue, you really see a small percent of the overall projects, just 19. But we just really want to take a look at what type of innovative new technology service types are being were submitted. And finally, the red is the expanded high capacity transit system. So new streetcar, new light rail, and the commuter rail, really just taking a look at that system. So again, in Marty's maps, we'll be particularly looking at the existing system, the green, the new routes, so the purple, and then high capacity transit. So that's essentially what we've seen in those maps. One final map from me before we turn it over to Marty and really see those project submissions. The maps are going to include locally funded projects, so only regional projects was submitted. But we do want to take a look at the locally funded projects. So this one here, we're showing the T2050 from the city of Phoenix. What routes, services they're proposing or were proposed under the T2050 process. So these polygons, these lines, these areas are going to be showing up in Marty's map. And we really just wanted to see how the region, all of the projects all fit together. So that will be the purpose of when you see those blue come up again in Marty's maps. So now I'll turn it over to Marty, and he'll begin really going through those project submissions.
Thank you, Omar. Chair Edwards and members of the boards, good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to take you through all of these projects. Essentially, I have a series of about 6 maps, and I'll just describe what you see on there and then talk through some specific details about where we see regional gaps. So essentially what you're seeing on this map, these are frequency improvements. The gray lines in the background, that's our existing network. And then the thicker gray lines are our existing high frequency network as defined by the transit standards and performance measures. In the Northwest Valley, you see some routes that are highlighted as yellow. Those are routes where submittals have come in to increase the frequency essentially to match up with the city of Phoenix. And then in the East Valley, you see a bunch of different things. The yellow lines to the further east are routes that have been identified as submittals to increase frequency, but not all the way up to the TSPM identified high frequency standards. And then all of those routes in that central part of the East Valley, those are the routes that have been submitted to be brought up to that 15-minute or better of service level. Looking at gaps, and this is something you're going to see on all of the maps that I present, these red ovals essentially are showing where we've identified as transit planners where the gaps are that would need to be filled in to make this a regional system. So what you see here, one example is Route 81. As submitted, there would be the increase in frequency on McClintock Road. However, that does not extend out to the north or to the south of where that thicker yellow line is. Essentially what that means is that that route in that central portion as submitted would increase to 15 minutes where it currently runs at about half-hour frequency. So every other bus would be turning around at either of those termini of that yellow line. Moving on to the next category, these are span of service improvements, essentially running buses earlier in the morning and then later on into the night. In the Northwest Valley, what you see are extensions similar to in the last map, where the submittals by the cities are to extend the span of service to match that with Phoenix. And then in the Southeast Valley, there are projects submitted to extend the span of service to match that of the light rail. Essentially what that means for passengers as submitted is that they could take the train later on at night, get off at one of those stops, and have confidence that there would be a bus to take them home. We did identify gaps here as well. And the one I'll point out is Route 136, so the bus that runs on Gilbert Road. As submitted, there are extensions in the northern portion of that route and the southern portion of that route. However, the span of service is not extended in the central portion of that route. In terms of our next map, these are the actual route extensions. So again, as in the past maps, the gray lines in the background are our existing network. And then the solid orange lines that you see are also a part of the existing network, but those are the routes that would benefit from the submitted extensions, which you can see as the hatched lines at the peripheries of the valley. As in the past maps, we did identify gaps. And the one that I'll point out here is Route 170 up in the Northwest Valley. Right now, that route ends at the Arrowhead Mall. As submitted, the route would be extended in Peoria and Surprise. However, there is about a 3-mile gap that you can see before the Surprise border. That area runs through Sun City, so a county island. In terms of new bus routes, what you're seeing right here is our existing network. So the green lines are our existing local routes. The purple lines are our existing circulators. And then the gray lines in the central part of the valley are our existing rail system, and then the extensions that are through Prop 400. And just to add in, these are new routes that are not yet implemented, but these are what Phoenix plans to add using local funding from T2050. In terms of the circulator projects that were submitted, you can see all of the lines in the Northwest Valley. Those are submittals where specific routes have been identified. And then all of the boxes that you see throughout the valley, those are submittals where areas in which cities would like to run circulators have been identified. However, the specific routing has not yet been laid out. The blue boxes you see in the Southeast Valley, those are submittals for new microtransit systems to serve those localized areas. And then finally, all of the green lines you see here are submittals for new local bus routes. As we have in the past, we identified gaps on this route. The one I'd like to point out here is L161 out in Fountain Hills. Essentially, you would have the submittal running through the town of Fountain Hills, and then about a 7-mile gap before it would connect into the regional system at the Mustang Transit Center. Continuing on our new service, this is looking at the other end of that equation, which is our express system and the associated park and rides. So what you see on here in pink, all of those pink lines, that's our existing express and rapid network. And then all of the pink dots are our park and rides for the bus. We do not show rail on this map, just bus. The blue lines you see are routes where Phoenix would like to extend or put in new service using T2050. And then all of the Prop 400 extension submittals are kind of that maroon color that you see throughout the valley. The maroon lines are all of the extensions and new express routes that have been submitted. And then all of the maroon dots are the park and rides associated with those. As we have on the other slides, we did identify gaps. Here, essentially where a park and ride has been submitted into the project, but a regional route to connect to that park and ride has not been submitted. And this is the main one, essentially looking at our existing system and then adding in all of the high capacity. So what you see on the map here is essentially a culmination of everything I've shown you on the past 4 slides. So these are all of our existing routes, as well as all of those extensions and new routes that we've shown you that have been submitted. And then adding in what Omar showed you right before handing the presentation off to me, these are all of the routes that Phoenix would like to either improve or add into using T2050. And again, that central area of Phoenix that's highlighted in that darker blue box, that is the area in which Phoenix is identified to study potential BRT routes. Continuing on the BRT trend, these are the submittals from different cities to run BRT using Prop 400 extension. These 2 boxes in the East Valley were submitted by Mesa. Essentially, these are areas where Mesa has submitted the desire to have high capacity transit. However, the specific mode has not yet been defined. Building off of our current streetcar network that's under construction in Tempe, you can see some submittals for new streetcars that would add into that East Valley streetcar system. And then this should look familiar to most everyone. This is the rail network that has been submitted for the light rail system to get extended. And then finally, these are the submittals for commuter rail that have been added in. So this would be a new mode into the valley. And we do acknowledge that to build a successful commuter rail system, it would have to be a regional effort. So what we wanted to do is show MAG's proposed commuter rail route from their last study, just to illustrate what it would take to make that a regional network. And then finally, the last map from me before I hand it back to Omar is essentially just to show what the paratransit implications would be of these submittals. So the area you see in kind of that hatched light purple in the Central Valley, that's our existing mandated paratransit service area. And I do bring up the word mandated because that is not analogous to the areas that are currently being served by paratransit. This is that minimal amount, that 3/4 mile area around bus routes. And the reason why we did it this way is to essentially have an apples to apples comparison of what it would look like as compared to the submittals that have come in. So everything that I've shown you on these past maps. The darker purple areas on the outskirts of the valley, those are all of the areas that would have expanded mandated paratransit service based on these submittals. And when we did the math, we saw that it would be about a 46% increase in the area in which we would have to provide ADA mandated paratransit. And at that point, I would like to hand it back to Omar.
Thank you, Marty. So I think those maps were very helpful in showing those project submissions, especially ones that were mappable, but there were a few that we did not map. But we do want to call out because they're important. Specifically, we do want to take a look and call out the safety and security and state of good repair type project submissions because they're important. We usually don't see them on flashy maps. Usually not the ones that we really talk about, but they're important to keep the system running safely and in good state of repair. But they also can be costly. So for example, number 7 here, which is the replacing of the light rail vehicles. To replace the original 50 light rail vehicles, that could be upwards of $300 million. So we do want to really call out these to show their importance and also that they will require resources. So just some key observations and takeaway before we move on to Mag's portion of the presentation. I think Marty's map, again, were very helpful in showing the gaps in creating a regional system with the project submissions. We do realize that there will be a high cost to implement those project submissions, both to do any capital, to purchase vehicles or build new lines, and also to continue the operation of that. I mentioned that we are doing a deeper dive into the cost of implementing those projects, those submissions. But at the high level, as a kind of a sketch cost, we do see at least $26 billion to $37 billion to implement and operate the projects that Marty mentioned. Again, I did talk about the existing system that we do have to continue operations on, and that is at least $104 million, not including routes services that are right now locally funded. It does not include that state of good repair capital improvements to continue that service. So we really see that the request, the submissions, they really exceed the regional resources, especially in the way that Prop 400 and Prop 400 extension could be funded. So at this portion, I'll turn it over to Mac to really speak more about how the history of that funding source and some options moving forward. So Audra.
Thanks so much, Omar. Greetings. Pleasure to be with the Valley Metro boards this morning to give you a little bit of an update and orient you to the development of our next regional transportation plan, which is really the policy document by statute that defines how regional funding is spent. I'm joined also with John Bullen today. We'll be bifurcating this presentation not only to give you some context on the plan development process, the multimodal investment strategy that will ultimately develop at the end of this process, but talk a little bit more about history of transit funding, which is quite unique to this region. Next slide. So again, just a bit of an outline today. We'll start this overview. We'll show you the findings of peer region analysis we completed this summer. Again, talked a little bit about unique history in transit funding and local resources in particular to the Valley of the Sun, and then talk a little bit about what steps looking forward and the big questions really ahead for policymakers this winter and into spring as we deal with some tough trade-off conversations. Next slide. So let's start with the RTP development process. Next slide. We'll depict here our federally required and state statutorily required performance-based plan development process. You'll see on the left hand of your screen, we start with a really large needs catalog. Currently, I think we're up to 1,400 or 1,500 different project ideas and submissions that we have to evaluate and refine that down to only the highest performing, those that meet our highest needs in the region, that ultimately would be comprised of a budget balanced or fiscally constrained plan strategy sometime next summer. Next slide. So while we focused a lot today on the transit submissions that came in through our call for projects, I wanted to recognize that we have a host of multimodal needs that have been illustrated by our member agencies in particular. Our job at MAG is as the regional planning authority, and our responsibilities are multimodal in nature. We are focused, federally required to focus on the regional system investments. And at the direction of our board of directors, what we call regional council, about a year ago, was to facilitate a call for projects to identify those ideas or concepts to be considered for regional funding in the future. And while we've demonstrated, Valley Metro staff has demonstrated the transit-related projects as part of that call, you'll see here a host of different transportation concepts, projects that span freeway and highway needs, arterial down to local streets, pavement preservation ideas, pedestrian or bicycle investments for active transportation network, lots of technology, emerging technologies, ITS solutions, safety, and a variety of operations and maintenance needs that span different kinds of modes and investments. Next slide. So I wanted to provide just a little bit of a highlight of our peer region analysis and focus specifically on the transit funding component of what we've learned in looking at our peers. Next slide. So we looked at a variety of peer regions. These are the major metropolitan centers here you'll see across the country. You'll see we focus largely west of the Mississippi in metropolitan centers similar to ours that are fast growing, have similar economies to ours. But I also want to note that we were deliberate in looking at MPOs that included Valley Metro's Transit Authority peers. That's a lot to say. Valley Metro has 6 transit identified as peers. You'll see them highlighted here in green. Recognize that as a metropolitan planning organization, our planning area is typically very large. Transit authorities, their footprints are smaller. As you know, transit investments are best focused where density occurs and in our urbanized centers. And so just recognizing there's a bit of a scale difference there as well. Next slide. So I think the keynote finding of our peer region analysis is that while this region was one of the first in the country to establish a dedicated sales tax to fund regional transportation investments back in 1985 through Proposition 300, we have been copied and now surpassed by all of our peer regions, especially in sales tax initiatives, but most importantly by amount of regional investment package. You'll see here, this is a peer comparison at a per capita level, with the MAG region being at the far left. We lowest per capita rates in transportation funding compared to our peer regions. Next slide. This becomes especially heightened when you look specifically at transit. So again, we have a half-cent dedicated sales tax in Proposition 400. It's a renewal of that half-cent. 1/3 of it was dedicated to transit investments. You'll see MAG highlighted here in the upper left corner. That translates to 0.17 cents for transit sales tax. You compare that across our peers, you see it's standard, not uncommon if standard to see at least a full cent in sales tax dedicated to delivering transit investments, if not more, relative to other areas. Next slide, Omar. You'll see we're not the only ones in this country looking to extend or even expand our tax base for transportation investments. I think we know how important transportation is to the economic prosperity and quality of life. And we've been monitoring our peers as they progress with their own taxing initiatives at the ballot box. Earlier this month, Austin, Texas, Campo, the region in Austin, Texas, they have an existing full cent sales tax, but they went back to their voters to add a property tax, 8.75%, to enable further transit investments, specifically over a $7 billion light rail capital and operations portfolio. And it passed easily with voters just a couple of weeks ago. So you'll see that it's not uncommon to continue transportation investments even in the midst of a pandemic. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to John Bullen, MAG's Transportation Economic and Finance Program Manager, who's going to talk a little bit more, bring it back local about the unique history of transit funding in this region and what it means looking forward. John?
Thank you, Audra. Good morning, everybody. Next slide, please. So back in 2004, voters in Maricopa County approved the Proposition 400 ballot initiative. But really, when we think about the Proposition 400 ballot initiative, it's the 2003 Regional Transportation Plan and the associated planning process that was used to develop all the projects and different components of that. So as part of the planning process, the MAG Transportation Policy Committee and MAG Regional Council decided to allocate the half-cent sales tax extension amongst 3 modes. 56.2% of it went to highways and freeways, 10.5% of it went to arterial street improvements, and then 33.33% of the half-cent sales tax went to transit. So that allocation that specifically goes to transit is known as the Public Transportation Fund, or PTF. Also, as part of the planning process, a decision was made to allocate the federal formula funds that flow to the MAG region, in addition to a portion of the Federal Highway Administration funds for air quality over to transit. And of course, those funds in aggregate, the plan itself, the transit component is managed by Valley Metro and done so through the Transit Lifecycle Program. Next slide, please. So the pie chart that you see on the screen represents the original allocations of the half-cent sales tax that was allocated to transit specifically. So just under 45% of it was allocated to the rail program, and the remaining portion was allocated to the bus program. So about 7% of total transit funding was allocated to ADA, and then the remaining portion was allocated to bus operations and then the bus capital that supports it. So think items like bus replacements, park and ride lots, operations and maintenance facilities, things of that sort. Next slide, please. So the intention back with the 2003 RTP and the Proposition 400 ballot initiative was to really take a plan-based approach to transit in the region. So prior to Proposition 400, there was a lot of inconsistencies in service across the valley. That is, routes operated with different frequencies, routes operated with different time frames in terms of the night and in the mornings, and it really depended on the jurisdiction for which those routes were operating. So the intention was to identify key regional routes, termed as super grid routes, and provide regional funding to bring them up to a consistent level of service. So as part of that plan, there was a phasing approach taken, whereby some routes were identified to initiate right when Proposition 400 sales tax collections commenced. And then there were other routes that were not anticipated to begin until the end of the plan, so fiscal years 21 through 25. Next slide, please. But as we all know, along came the Great Recession, and it hit the Proposition 400 program hard. So if we were to look back at the original projection of sales tax collections, compare that to where we currently stand and what we currently forecast for the remaining portion of the program, we're about 40% less than what we had originally anticipated. Transit in particular is arguably hit harder than the other two programs. That's in part because the other two programs do have a considerable amount of federal funding and other revenues that flow into them. Transit, on the other hand, specifically transit operations, bus operations, is very dependent on the sales tax collections. So as a result, the Valley Metro Board made a policy decision in 2009, 2010 to move away from the plan-based approach to the policy that's currently in place today, which is more of a funding allocation-based approach. Next slide, please. So of course, looking back on it, we've had two different approaches throughout the life of Proposition 400, and really the challenge is that things change. The region looks a whole lot different than it did in 2003. It even looks different than it did back in 2009, 2010. So as we're looking forward, I think it's important to take into consideration those changes over time and really assess how we want to address regional transit moving forward. Next slide, please. So before we move on, this is a frequent question that we get asked, so I wanted to provide some clarification and some context. So one of the stated goals of the 2003 Regional Transportation Plan and its development was that there was a balance in investments across the region. Specifically, balance in investments throughout the three subregions, the West, Central, and East, across all modes. So this was actually achieved, and what you saw is that, depending on the side of the valley and the investment priorities at the time, there was more investment in freeways on the west side and greater emphasis on investment in transit on the east side. And that's in part why you see some of the differences in investments. That was calculated at a sub-regional basis, and it was not done on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. Next slide, please. So as we think about our approach moving forward, one of the really important aspects, particularly when it comes to transit, is the role of local funding. Next slide, please. This is a region that is somewhat unique in that we're heavily dependent on local funding to deliver regional transportation investments. Not just transit, certainly that's applicable to the arterial system as well. But in terms of transit, what we see is that there's a number of communities that have actually passed their own dedicated transportation sales tax. And there's a significant portion, in some cases, all of it, allocated to transit. Next slide, please. And we see that in the data. So the chart on the screen shows a funding composition breakdown of the different sources for fiscal year 2019. And what we see is that the vast majority of the funding for transit operations costs across all modes came from local sources, almost 70%. Next slide, please. This picture, I think, depicts the same story, perhaps in a more telling fashion. So what this shows is all the local bus routes that were operating in 2019. So it does not include the circulators. It does not include rural routes. This map does not include express routes. And there were 60 routes overall. So of those 60 routes, only 6 were entirely funded by the region. There were an additional 23 routes that had some combination of regional funding and local funding. And then the majority, 31 of the 60, were funded entirely through local resources. Next slide, please. So similar story on the express route slide. So this shows all the express routes in fiscal year 2019. And what we found is that 13 routes are entirely funded by the region. There are 2 routes that are funded by a combination of regional resources and local resources, and then 6 routes that are funded entirely through local resources. Next slide, please. So pulling it together, really, I think the big question that faces our policymakers, and one of the big questions that the MAG Transportation Policy Committee will have to wrestle with, is how do we address regional transit service moving forward? Next slide, please. And really one of the unique attributes that we have to account for this time that we did not face in Proposition 400 is that there's already ongoing commitments to operations. So with Proposition 300, it was entirely focused on freeway capital. With Proposition 400, we expanded that to include multimodal improvements. So as we think about the extension of Proposition 400, there's already a portion of that funding that's committed for ongoing commitments. So as Omar had shown earlier, approximately $104 million a year of ongoing operational commitments to transit in 2025. So as we devise our approach moving forward, we have to take this into consideration. Next slide, please. So really we see 3 different options, or perhaps a combination of these options moving forward. We could revisit the long-range plan-based approach. So this is the original approach that we took with Proposition 400. We could stick with what we have today, which is more of a revenue allocation-based approach, or an alternative option, which would be new to this region, but certainly not new nationally, would be to move to more of a performance-based formula system. So with that, I'll turn it over to Audra to talk a little bit more.
Thanks, John. Omar, let's move to the next slide. So what we see across the country is this performance-based approach to managing operating assistance to bus service. And there are kind of 5 key tenets, if you will, to that best practice. Allocations are based on actual transit performance data that's calculated annually, which correlates to service productivity and therefore incentivizes demand-based from a regional perspective. Next slide. There's, of course, benefits and takeaways from each of these approaches. You know, if we went back to the Proposition 400 or 2003 regional transportation process where we did a plan-based approach, I mean, certainly an advantage there is that we clearly delineate and articulate where the regional priorities are, and you have a focused plan. But as you know, as the board for Raleigh Metro, things change, and transit demand in particular is quite dynamic. And so having to do bus service, project bus service for 20, 25, 30 years from now is an extremely difficult process. And in fact, you know, we make service changes in this region every 6 months to equate for and adjust to the changes in demand and population changes or demographics that transit is so highly vulnerable to. We could continue with a fixed allocation approach. It's certainly consistent with existing policy, but it does not focus and incentivize regional service. Fixed rates over time do not equate for or respond to change. And it has its own issues of equity, especially when applied at a regional level. Or we could, as John mentioned, translate to what our peers have done, which is a performance-based model. where we're really promoting high quality regional services, especially with scarce resources. That's highly adaptive to change over time, and is, of course, consistent with industry best practice. It would be something new and would probably require a few years of transition. But also, as John mentioned, perhaps there's a layered approach for which we can consider looking forward. Next slide. So again, we're going to end this presentation where we started, and Scott certainly started us off well with these two really fundamental questions that we're wrestling with over at MAG. As the Regional Planning Authority and focused on regional system investments, I think when it comes to that question, we've asked our policymakers ultimately have to answer, what are those core elements of a regional transit system? And moreover, what's the region's role in helping to fund that regional transit system? So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Scott. I think this is an opportunity we see for dialogue, an opportunity for you to ask questions and to get feedback. So Scott, you want to take it from here?
Thanks, Audra, and thank you to Omar and Marty and John for a great presentation. When I was first given this presentation by the team, it was very sobering. These are things that I recognized were going on, but when you see the actual data, it really hits home that we have a huge challenge in this region. And as you can saw, there are many components of that. One of the things that I hope we take away is when you look at how we have developed the plan for going forward, it was very much through the portal a bottom-up approach. And the bottom approach means that individual cities submitted very worthwhile projects, but they were city-specific type projects in most cases. And you saw the challenge between going from city-specific to a more regional connectivity, because there's huge gaps, and those gaps have to be filled. The second thing that came up was the fact that our expectations, our Christmas list, so to speak, far exceed the revenues and the resources that we have. And that's a twofold question. First of all, as you saw, only about 30% of our total transit costs are funded regionally. The rest are funded locally, which means that decisions on what routes we run are by nature a local decision. That seems to create conflicts between the aspiration of creating regional connectivity and what takes care of the local needs. So I guess we have to look back as to what is the role that Valley Metro has. And really our role, as I think John pointed out, is to develop a plan or input as to how we allocate the regional resources, the resources that we receive through whatever tax, right now it's Prop 400, whatever tax comes up, how do we allocate those out to meet regional goals? And on this, as you can see, we have a long way to go to really come to some consensus as to how that will play out in the future. And as John said, we already have a great obligation to continue on what we're currently funding. And as he also said, the amount we're funding right now because of the Great Recession really doesn't come close to that which was envisioned when Prop 400 was developed and was approved in 2003 and 2004. So with this in mind, I think, there's a lot of questions we can raise, and we need to get back. And I know at the management group, they really focused on, we need to find what our baseline regional plan is. What do we have to give out now before we can really address where we want to go? And if you want to go somewhere, then it leads to other discussions about revenue allocation, increasing pots, those kind of things. So I hope that this gave all of you a lot of food for thought. I know it did to me. And Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you. And with that summary, open it up for discussion or questions that might come from the board.
Thank you, Scott. I just want to thank all those presenters. You guys, for me specifically, was a definite eye-opener. I kind of put some pieces together that I had been questioning for a little while. So thank you so much for filling in the gaps for me. So with that, is there anybody out there that has any questions or comments that they'd like to talk about?
Through the chair, Kevin Chandler.
Yes.
I want to thank Audra and John. I've had probably one of a few, if maybe I might be the only one, I'm not sure, that has the honor and privilege of serving on this board as well as the Regional Transportation Committee and the MAG Regional Board. So I've had the benefit of seeing this presentation a few times at different levels, and I do want to thank Audra and John for the work that they have done. We're a rough bunch of cats, to be honest, to kind of wrestle and bring together with our looking at our own individual community leads as well as the sub-region between what most benefits our residents and as well as the greater region. And just a couple comments on that is that I still, fight and believe that ultimately when we bring this to the voters, every voter, whether it's in Wickenburg or Queen Creek or Cave Creek or Goodyear, in order to get this passed, everyone's got to somehow see a benefit they can directly derive, maybe not in their own individual area, but certainly in their region. I'm going through a bond allocation process right now, as we're going to have that on the ballot in a year. And I realize when I talk parks in Chandler, I've got to make sure that South Chandler, in order for them to approve that bond, they're going to have to see benefit in that and not just the center or west. And the same applies, in my thought, with our entire region. It's got to serve the entire region. The entire region has to see benefit from that. And I know we're wrestling through that. So I do want to thank our MAG folks and us being part of the equation and working on this. And one other comment is that I support a fixed allocation for our existing lines, and that would lead into a layered approach as we realizing that there's gaps that if we just go to a future process, we've got to make sure that what serves Gilbert also, for them to be successful, has got to, as it is now, also serve Mesa and Chandler. So, and if one group would say, well, this is less beneficial, or how that would work out, I believe we have to have a fixed allocation for existing lines and moving on from there, even though there's a price tag for that. So with that, again, I'm excited about this ongoing, unfolding process as we on Valley Metro and RPTA work with MAG to come up with a funding amount and a funding program that we can present to our supervisors, to our legislators, and ultimately to our voters to further the advance of transportation across our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Councilmember Clapp.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. Just like the last speaker, I've heard it before. I was in the TPC meeting as well, but it's good to get a better understanding of the problems we face. And I think we have to understand that we can't rely totally on a regional plan when we have scarce resources. This is just a given that we've got to be careful the way we plan regionally, and then cities are going to have some flexibility in this plan for them to do some things to supplement what could be done regionally. And we feel relatively proud in Scottsdale that on your chart, we started in 1989 with our own local sales tax and have been able to utilize it for our own benefit. But I think the presentation tells me one thing that I've thought since I've served on this board, and that we do have one pretty important regional system, and that's paratransit. And I think we have to continue to think of that regionally. Paratransit is not going to work very well, as we know, if we try to have each city do their own plan related to paratransit. So anything in this new plan that makes paratransit a little bit more regionally focused, I think is good for us, because many of us locally just aren't able to provide a local system that will work as well as a regional system. And our transportation people in Scottsdale have talked about this, and we believe the system that is based on performance would be best for us to look at. I think it's the best approach. You have to build in efficiencies. You have to look at data. You have to base your decisions on information that tells you whether or not you're providing the most efficient service at the lowest cost. So leaning toward option 3 would be our choice as far as how we're going to plan for the way money is going to be allocated. And for us as well, since we don't have light rail, that there should be emphasis put on some kind of a regional bus rapid transit system. We have some, but I wouldn't call it regional. So the bus rapid transit system is important for us to be looking at in the future. We've tried it some in the past, but it doesn't really connect well to the rest of the region. And that's the key. It's going to have to be a good regional system that will feed into Scottsdale for our riders to actually use it. And so those are my thoughts about the presentation. And if I have anything else, I'll let you know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, it's Lauren.
Yes, Lauren.
I was especially pleased to see the slide that showed that a little over 70% of the operational costs of it comes from local funds. And I know this has been and there's really, I mean, there's more cities in the region that don't have local funding than there are that do have local funding. And I think, you know, I mean, the conversation is going to have to be had that in order to have a robust transit system, really for cities, you've got to have a lot of money in your general fund, or you've got to have a dedicated funding source. I mean, even the Half-Set in Glendale really, I mean, it's just, I mean, we make it work, but it's just not enough. Transit. And I've had this conversation with, you know, other board members who don't have a dedicated funding source, that even if you get the buses, if you're given the buses, the expensive part is operating the routes. That's so expensive to operate the routes. So, I mean, I think we're going to have to get real about these conversations we're having, is that this transit cannot be entirely the region's responsibility. That you're not going to, and I mean, if you're not going to be able to have a robust system if you're solely relying on regional funding. It just isn't going to work that way. And the same with paratransit. I mean, as you saw that map, how big that service delivery area gets with expanding our service. So, I mean, that's another really important thing to keep in mind. And I agree with Councilmember Clapper. I think it's Vice Mayor Clapp. But we've got to keep in mind that as we grow our service area, we grow our paratransit service delivery area also within a quarter mile any direction, and that's a very expensive service to provide. So I'm glad to see that we're having some real heart-to-heart conversations about really what this really means. And I mean, it's a daunting task, and the presentations were really great, you guys. But I was really glad to see that slide in there that really brings it home that without the local funding, you're not going to be able to provide a robust transit system for your residents. That's all I had today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Chair, this is Bill.
Yes, Bill.
So for everyone's benefit, after this presentation ended, I was almost speechless, which I'm gonna, everyone should be shocked by that. But in listening to the conversations, as a community who does not have a local funding tax at the moment, one of the things that we would talk about internally is, okay, let's talk about a transportation tax, but without knowing what does the region what does the bigger picture look like. It's hard to have that conversation with the taxpayer about funding a transit system that it appears as though we don't even connect to. So any local transit tax for us is difficult. It's a difficult conversation without really looking at it. So this presentation, for me, very eye-opening. There's a couple of the slides in there that I couldn't really read very well, that I want to get the actual slide that I can expand, take a look at the map. But I think there's some really good opportunities for us regionally, which will then help those of us that don't have the tax that are looking at it to consider putting it in to see how we can plug together. And the example that I constantly use as I talk is we need this network of spines that interconnect as a system that then allow me as a local provider to connect to that system. So we've got an express bus that runs from there's one that starts in Buckeye that runs through Goodyear, and then ours that runs into downtown. But really, how do we move people east and west? That's our biggest problem. Regionally, north and south appears to be easy. It's the east-west problem that we have. And if we've got a lot of our residents who are working in the East Valley via public transit, how do we get them over there? So I think this really is going to start a lot of really good conversations as far as that is concerned. The one question that I really kind of struggle with just emotionally is, and I'm looking for my notes, I think Valley Metro Board, we need to know what current policies this previous boards have made. What is the whole list of policies that we're functioning under, or we're potentially functioning under going into the future? We hear it as they come up. Oh, well, there's a board policy on that. It was enacted in 2006, or there's a board policy on that. It was enacted in 2012. Most of the people sitting in this meeting right now were not on the board at that time. So I think getting a summary from our staff about, from the Valley Metro staff, what does that look like, will help us make better decisions. So I am very grateful for the presentation, the work that I think the Valley Metro staff and MAG staff have done, and look forward to us having future conversations about options, answering the public policy questions in the memorandum as a board, and then really trying to figure out how do we move forward. I think with the idea of helping those that don't have regional tax, give us a way in, because I can't go to the voters of Goodyear and ask for regional tax if I've got nothing to plug into. So I think we've got some really good discussions coming up. So thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Stephen, sorry I missed you earlier.
No worries. Thank you very much. For those of you I haven't met, my name's Stephen Methvin. I am Tempe's representative on the management committee, and I'm a deputy city manager for the city of Tempe. And I just wanted to echo Councilmember Tomachoff's comments about those cities that have a dedicated revenue source for transit, and maybe elaborate on some of that too. I see Glendale and Tempe in very similar positions, and that we're the gateways to these regions of our valley. Glendale is the gateway from Phoenix to the Northwest Valley, and Tempe is the gateway in the Southeast Valley to the rest of the Southeast communities. When we, in Tempe, as many of you may have heard from Councilmember Arredondo Savage, we are actually having to do transit reductions from our dedicated tax because our services are outpacing our revenue. So we're going through the process right now of scaling back service. And I appreciate the council member from Glendale's comments about the performance-based, because when we have these roads that are regional in nature and these transit routes that are regional in nature, we need to, Phoenix does an awesome job of providing service within Phoenix, and then Glendale and Tempe and other communities as well. But I would say Glendale and Tempe in greater degrees connect to that, and then we need to connect them beyond. And if there are those cities that don't have robust transit tax that can make those connections, I don't think the region is ever going to be able to pick up the bill to do all of what we need for a robust system from border to border, east to west, north to south. So certainly not, each community makes their own decisions, but I think that we shouldn't let that escape us, in that we do have these gateway communities that link the rest of the outer parts of our region. And how do we make sure that we're all carrying, we all have equal responsibility for making sure that those routes exist and can expand? Because again, where we sit, we're having to scale back, and we're worried about scaling back because what does that mean for our communities to the south and east of us? It means that they might not be able to connect to service. So just like the council member, I believe from Buckeye said, we need to find ways of getting folks from one side of the valley to the other side. And if we fail somewhere in the middle, that will never happen. And I often think about those communities that are nationwide that have not just a regional system, a regional authority, and not just a regional tax, but have a tax that supports that regional system. And it does, to some degree, take the control out of communities' hands. But then that's where we see these very robust border-to-border transportation systems. So I just wanted to make that comment and say thank you for letting me sit in on the meeting today. And I know that Councilmember Arredondo Savage wanted to be here, but she had a conflict. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Anybody else?
Chair?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Roland.
Thanks very much for that presentation. There was a lot of work involved in that. I appreciate it. One of the things that were mentioned was the bus route that runs along Bell Road going west toward Surprise. And of course, we don't have any kind of a transit tax here. But how do we close that gap between when that bus stops at the mall in Peoria and can't go on to Surprise? And the one other factor is Sun City is between us, and that's county. So I don't know if they even can put any money toward some kind of a transit tax. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could, this is Scott. Roland, you bring up a great question, and the what we're trying to point out, and this is not a comment on any particular jurisdiction because it happens throughout the valley, and that we have many routes such as what you were talking about that really are regional in nature, in the fact that they're these like Bell Road is utilized as a regional thoroughfare, but it goes through several different jurisdictions. And the way our system is set up right now, we have two choices. We either fund the transit connection that goes along that route at a regional level, and since we have limited funds, as you saw, we only have 6 routes in the entire valley that are funded at the regional level. We have to rely on each jurisdiction to sign up and to commit to participating. You can see the challenges that raises because as we've talked about a lot, not every community has the same resources available or the same desires. And so that's the real challenge and the real conflict that we have to work through is in defining what a regional system is. As John Bolin pointed out in his maps, originally these questions were supposed to or were envisioned of being more on a regional level because the resources that were projected provided enough funds to avoid these kind of individual jurisdictional challenges. The Great Recession, as John said, 40% reduction in total revenues for the 20-year life cycle of transit. That was brutal. And I was part of the rebalancing, what we called it in 2009, where we went back and basically redid the system into what we have now, recognizing that it created the kind of challenges that you're talking about, Roland. So I think great comments, but we have to get down to the basic things. How are we going to build this regional connectivity, either through funding it at a regional, treating it truly regional, or by somehow being able to bridge that local gap where it's not dependent upon one jurisdiction to complete what is a regional service. That's the challenge that we have.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Scott.
Okay, do we have anybody else? Okay, well, again, I want to thank everybody for attending today, especially our guest speakers. And Scott, thank you so much for you and your staff for putting this together, because this really has been something that we've wanted to have as a presentation for a little while. So this really kind of helps us in better being able to make decisions going forward into the next level of Prop 400 extension.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And from now, you want to go to the next, well, I guess you're not sharing anymore. But the next steps are, as I've said, there is a MAG process. It is a process that some of you are directly involved. If you're not directly involved in the MAG process, you have a representative from your city, either the mayor or someone else who is part of either the regional council or the Transportation Policy Committee. And you all have city managers or town managers who are involved in the management council, and that's where a lot of the nuts and bolts are taking place. So MAG has been here, gotten your input, great input. We appreciate it. I think very valuable comments and suggestions. We will now continue to, Valley Metro will continue to coordinate with MAG staff, Audra and John and the others, in bringing forth the ideas and the principles that you've talked about. We all are also developing more high-level cost estimates that MAG has asked us to do to identify the gap funding and other types of things, so we can get a real picture as to what this might cost. And then we'll continue the discussion at that level in MAG and otherwise as to the decision on dealing with the realities that we have and the aspirations. So I would suggest that if you have follow-up, please talk to me or anyone on our staff. We'll be more than happy to share that with MAG, or talk to your mayor or council member, whoever is involved in either the TPC or the regional council, or talk to your management staff, because all those are going to meetings that directly affect the decisions that you brought up and are talking about. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair. That concludes this study session.
Good. Thank you so much, Scott. Okay, guys, with that, we will meet back here in about 6 minutes, 7 minutes. Thank you, everybody.
If you're staying for the board meeting on this WebEx, please remain on this WebEx. It's the same as the study session, so there's no need to disconnect. But we will start promptly at 11:15. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, it is 11:15. We can begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Pat. So I'm going to convene the meeting and welcome all the members to the November meeting. Pat, would you please do a roll call?
Yes, sir. Vice Mayor Pat Dennis. Councilmember Clay Goodman.
Present.
Mayor Kevin Hartke. Mayor Alexis Hermosillo.
Present.
Councilmember Mike Sharnow. Councilmember Jared Taylor.
Present.
Councilmember Lauren Tomachoff.
Present.
Vice Mayor Bill Stipp.
Present.
Supervisor Jack Sellers. Councilmember Francisco Heredia.
Here.
Councilmember John Edwards.
Present.
Mayor Kate Gallego.
Present.
Mayor Garrell Barney. Councilmember Suzanne Clapp. Councilmember Roland Winters.
Here.
Councilmember Robin Arredondo Savage. Councilmember Linda Laborian. Mayor Rui Pereira. Mayor Michael LaVault.
Yes, Pat, I'm here.
Councilmember Mike Sharnow, are you on the call?
I am here. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mr. Chair, we are ready to proceed.
And Pat, this is Jack Sellers. I didn't get unmuted in time to answer the roll call.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. If everybody would take a moment and stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. If a board member would like to ask a question or make a comment during the meeting, please type your comment in the comment box and it'll be read out loud and answered. All meeting attendees, please mute your phone or your computer microphone during the meeting. We will be making an adjustment to the agenda directly following the CEO report. The board will consider action item 6, the minutes, and action item 7, the consent agenda. So item number 1 would be public comment. For today's meeting, public comment is being taken during written format and will be entered into the official minutes of the meeting. Item number 2 is the Chief Executive report. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And once again, thanks to all of you in the study session for your great comments and suggestions. We at Valley Metro, we have among our staff what we call shifting gear moments. And these are things where people really show up and go beyond the call of duty to do things. And last night we had an incident out in Mesa with our light rail where it really showed how what our staff is made of. And slide, if you want to. We had a train that actually derailed. They had a switch plate that popped up and caused the vehicle to derail. This happened very late at night when most of our staff are, of course, not on site. We do have emergency staff there, but our incident team is on 24/7 call, and they got up, left their homes, and in about an hour from the time that it first happened, they lifted. As you can see on the right side, these are not light or small things. Even though they're light rail, they're not light. And they gathered together from all parts of the valley, from their homes and from the OMC, and put this back on the track so that our train service could continue. There were no injuries or anything, so it was a minor derailment. But when trains off the rail, it's off the rail. Can't go anywhere. So I just want to tell our OMC and point out this shifting gear moment and let you know how proud we are of them for the work that they do. Second thing I'd like to talk about is, if you'll recall, several months ago, the board approved the purchase of a new vehicle for us, and that is a commuter coach. If you'll remember, we bought this not because it was a novelty, but because it actually will allow us to serve our commuter passengers, which is a premium service at a lower cost than our existing buses do. We had the first MCI commuter coach arrive. These buses will be deployed on both East Valley and West Valley express routes beginning next year. We're training our drivers and our maintenance personnel on the new thing, and we've during the time that we did the test period last year, got very, very positive comments from our riders, and I'm looking forward to putting this into service because you can see they're good-looking vehicles, they're good-looking buses, and I think they'll add to the premium service that we have. Next, I'd like to tell you that our staff is out and about, and we have not slowed down in our efforts to battle this pandemic that we are in the middle of. We have delivered. We are going to be delivering approximately 25,000 face coverings to passengers to make sure that we have compliance on our buses and trains and paratransit to help make sure that everybody has face coverings. Most of these face coverings were provided by the FTA through their program, and we had staff that came in and, believe it or not, broke down huge boxes of literally thousands of these face coverings and put them into individual packets that you can see our staff out there handing out. They're handing them out on both bus and rail transit centers and stops to make sure that we cover everyone. And we are just want to once again encourage everybody, if you're not distanced from anyone else, and I am very distanced in the boardroom here, please put your face mask on. Let's help it out. We are continuing, we'll just go next. As you can see, we are still continuing with our enhanced cleaning services on both buses and light rail. And even though science has said that this virus is more airborne than it is contact, we are not taking any chances, and we are continuing to clean buses, to wipe them down. It's just good sanitary procedure, and we're still doing that until we can get some better information that we shouldn't. We want to make sure our staff and our passengers have the highest level of protection. So we appreciate our staff for continuing to do that. It is next week is Thanksgiving. I know since it was 93 yesterday, something like that. It's hard to imagine that we are in Thanksgiving, and that means the Christmas time and the holiday season begins. Every year we do bus and train wraps. This year, our holiday bus and train wrap was actually developed in-house by our graphics designer, Susan Nunez. And as you can see, very, very nice. It says, "Merry everything and a happy always." We're very committed to a specific thing here. I want to make sure we cover all. For those of our Spanish speaking, it's alegría en todo y felicidad para siempre. I just want to make sure we are covered in both English and Spanish. You'll see this on a couple buses and light rail throughout the holiday season. And we are very, very proud that Suzanne and her good work that she's done, and wish everyone a happy holiday. You see our upcoming meetings. We have talked about having perhaps a study session in December, and I'll leave that to Paul, because when he has his budget presentation, we can decide whether we're going to need to get together in December to have further discussions. Other than that, we'll be back here in January, meeting still on WebEx. And last but certainly not least, I want to personally give my thanks, and hope you'll all join in thanking Councilmember Suzanne Clapp. This will be her last official VM Valley Metro board meeting. And, excuse me, Councilmember Clapp ends 12 years of service on the Scottsdale City Council. She has been an incredible supporter of Valley Metro and of transit in the region and transportation in general, a real shining star. Suzanne, I hope I'm embarrassing you, because you have deserved every bit of it. We are thankful for your service. I'm thankful to be able to work with you for many years, especially the last almost 6 years here at Valley Metro, and I'm grateful for your service and wish you the very, very best in whatever endeavor you undertake. So if we could give a virtual clap, thank you to Suzanne Clapp. A clap for Clapp. Suzanne, I don't know if you want to say anything. If you do, just unmute and speak up.
Yeah, I've unmuted, and I don't have much to say other than thank you for the kind words. I've really enjoyed the time I've worked on this committee. And of course, as I mentioned before, on the study session, I'm also on the TPC group for MAG as well. It's been a great experience. I hope to pass on some of my knowledge to whomever may replace me on this particular board. We'll see. I don't know who that will be at this point, but you can call on me if you want to help in educating. I'm happy to do that because I think the work of Valley Metro is extremely important, as well as all the work that takes place in MAG that deals with transportation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And this is one of the times that I am really sorry that we aren't here in person, so we couldn't show you our real appreciation. I guess the computer screen will have to do for right now. But thank you and good luck. And believe me, we hope you continue to be involved in the regional discussion. As we saw, there's a lot to be talked about and a lot to be decided, and I hope you play a big role in that. So thank you. And Mr. Chair, that's my report.
Thank you, Scott. And Suzanne, thank you for all the service that you've done. I remember coming on to this committee, and you were actually the first person that I interacted with, and you welcomed me with open arms and said if there's anything I could ever do to reach out. And I have reached out to you for several occasions. I just want to thank you again for kind of taking me under your wing and helping me while I was on the committee.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I really am sincere that if anybody needs some help in the future, I'm still around. I'm not dead.
Thank you.
I'm alive and kicking.
Okay. So the next item is the minutes. So the minutes from the October 22nd, 2020 joint meeting are presented for approval. I'm looking for a motion and a second to approve the revised October 22nd, 2020 joint board meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Kevin Harkey.
Second, Mayor Hermosillo.
We have a first and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? And carries. Okay. Next item would be the consent agenda. The consent agenda is presented for action. And is there any board member that has any questions or any items that need to be pulled for separate discussion? Seeing none, can I have a motion and a second on the consent agenda?
Make a motion, we approve the minutes.
We have a motion for
I don't know if that was a motion for the consent agenda. Not was it?
it was.
Okay, I second it then.
Yes, it was.
So all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Next item would be a COVID-19 update. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I present this, and Paul Hodges is going to give the presentation, I'd like you to sort of do a major shift. I remember one time I was at a tasting meal, and I don't know, many of you have done this, where between the different dishes, they actually handed around this small little cup of I thought it was ice cream, and they said it was sorbet. And I go, what is the sorbet for? They said, well, it's sort of to cleanse your palate. So as you move from one course to the next course, you can start out afresh without having a carryover. Well, if we were all together, I'd be handing out sorbet right now because we're making a major shift. We spent an hour, almost a little over an hour, talking about the future and about the finances and about revenues, and when we talked about the Prop 400 extension. And now we're going to shift into the present, what we're dealing with right now. And while those two, there's no doubt that they're connected, but they are really very different discussions and a very different mindset. We started out this process, back in March and April when we were hit with something that none of us have ever experienced, and that was this pandemic. And we had no idea what was in front of us. We just knew it was bad. And at that time, the discussion was, the real concern and the fear was of what the financial impact would be on all of us. Congress acted, and they enacted the CARES Act, thank heavens, and provided us with a backstop to handle what everyone projected would be a significant financial losses across the board. We're now 7, 8 months down the track, and I think it's important, and what the board asked us to do is to come back now and let's look and see where we are now. What has changed? What's been the change? And how have we allocated these CARES money? This is a big question we have, is that this CARES money that came into the region of millions and millions of dollars, how we allocated that. So I'd like you, first of all, to get away from the Prop 4 extension, but also we have gone the last several months still based on our March and April discussions. And what I'd like you to do, as Paul talks about it, is to put yourself today, because we really need to look and see what are we going to do going forward. And before we get going on this, I want to make one thing clear, and that is that it came up clear through a few meetings that we've had, and that is the discussion on service levels. During the pandemic, we have maintained service levels at Valley Metro with a few exceptions, and those exceptions have been based not on finances, because we had CARES and other things, but basically on ridership, for example, express routes where there were no riders, and on our ability to put service on the street. That is especially on the rail, where we have COVID, we have other things. And sometimes it's been a real chore to make sure we have service on the street. These have not been driven by finances. That is not the primary reason. And in a lot of the discussion that's come forward, we sort of have mixed those two. So as Paul goes through his thing, recognize that while finances obviously are very important, they have not been the driving factor in our decisions to date. This comes especially important as we look into the future as to say what happens when the CARES Act money runs out, and we've always pointed to the beginning of fiscal 22 to see what happens. 5 months ago, we were envisioning a cliff. We were envisioning falling off this cliff and seeing, wow, what do we do at that? That was when we were thinking about how the general financial situation would be dire. I think what Paul will show you is that that's changed a little bit, and would like you to just think in that mode as we take in what the data that he has to present and how we utilize that in planning for the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul, and he can get on with the presentation. Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Chair, members of the board, I did want to talk through a little bit on the CARES Act and how it was allocated in the region, how it came to Valley Metro, and how we are using it. Just following up on some of the questions that came up at the last board meeting. So from a high level, as Scott mentioned, the CARES Act was passed, provided $25 billion for public transportation, and it was really to support ongoing operations, to maintain the workforce, to address any economic conditions, so losses in fare revenues, losses in local sales taxes, those types of things. FTA allocated it using existing formulas to regions, to urbanized areas, as defined by the Census Bureau, which we have 2 in our region, 2 urbanized areas, but also to some non-urbanized areas, and those funds go to ADOT. So the funds that came to our region, to the urbanized areas, Phoenix, Mesa, and Avondale, Goodyear, those are all programmed by MAG, and MAG went through a process to create allocations to local operators, not necessarily to cities and agencies that fund service, but those that operate service. And ADOT did the same thing. So funds that came for non-urbanized or for rural areas, they've allocated those funds to rural operators. If you go to the next slide. So MAG went through a process to identify how to apportion first for the Phoenix Mesa urbanized area. It's $188 million that came in. They did a 2-part allocation. The first was to separate rail and non-rail. We call it bus, but it's bus and paratransit really. So they allocated $45 million for rail and $143 million for bus. And then you can see within, below that, each operator. So Valley Metro Rail being the rail operator. And then the cities of Glendale, Peoria, Phoenix, and Scottsdale received allocations, and also Valley Metro RTP. For the Avondale Goodyear urbanized area, basically the same process, but no rail in that urbanized area. So the apportionment of $9.6 million was allocated. There's a piece for the city of Goodyear, city of Phoenix, and also to Valley Metro for the bus services that are operated in that area. And then with ADOT, there's $41.7 million statewide. They use their current list of operators that receive assistance through the 5311 program, that's FTA's rural assistance program, and just allocated those funds pro rata based on how their normal allocation goes. So Valley Metro RPTA received just a little over $890,000 to support the Route 685, our rural route from Ajo and Gila Bend. So once those allocations came to Valley Metro, on the RPTA side, we sub-allocated based on the modes that we operate. So we set aside about $1 million for the van pool program, and then the remainder, we split 85% to our fixed route services and 15% to our demand services. This was after a discussion with your staff. This was done at a staff level with the financial working group, recognizing that demand services, because they are based on demand and the demand decreased significantly, our costs reduced significantly. So we agreed that perhaps a lesser share of the CARES Act was needed because we had a lower demand. So that's why the slightly higher proportion of CARES went to fixed route. But then beyond that, it gets applied across the board for fixed route and demand based on how we allocate the cost for those services. And we all agreed at the staff level, and we discussed this through the budget process, that the majority of those funds would be used and applied in fiscal 21. So the next slide just kind of shows how we've allocated those by service, and then the amount for fiscal 21 in the Phoenix Mesa urbanized area. Those are allocated on a per mile basis. For fixed route, we have 36.4 million allocated. 34.2 would be used in fiscal 21. I won't go through each line, but you can see kind of within each urbanized area how those get allocated and how much we propose to use in fiscal 21. And the next slide, just a quick how we apply those, just so you understand how it flows. So for fixed route and demand service, because this is intended to offset our operating costs, we collect those pool of costs for fixed route and demand services, that's paratransit and ride choice. Majority of those costs are directly related to operations, and those are our contracts with First Transit, with Total Ride, Transdev, ALC, but also some of our facility maintenance and our administrative support. So we collect those total expenses. We have to take off fare revenue, and I'll note the demand, we program that net of fare revenue, so it's already been removed from the operation services. But so we get a net cost to provide the service that's eligible for those federal funds. So then we apply those CARES Act revenues, any other federal revenues. So that gets to the net cost that's really the burden on the regional PTF and local member city funds. So you can see that the bottom line then that's locally funded is reduced by those CARES Act. So it helps to offset the loss in fare revenue and provide some relief to those local revenues. And the next slide just is a summary by city and also the RPTA, kind of the Prop 400 services by fixed route and demand services of how those CARES Act funds then get applied and the reduction in the need for local revenues for each city for fiscal 21.
So Paul, just a minute, that means each of your cities got a credit for that amount. So the amount that you pay to Valley Metro for services was credited by either the fixed route or the demand service. So you as an individual city are paying in the amount on the screen less this year than you would have paid in a normal year. So the benefit of the CARES money flowed straight down to the individual jurisdictions.
So the VMR allocation is a little more straightforward. We don't have multiple modes and urbanized areas. It's all allocated to rail operations. We didn't allocate any of it to planning or state of good repair projects. Strictly rail operations that are funded by Phoenix, Mesa, and Tempe, and those are used to reduce the net amounts that are paid. And as with the RPTA side, the majority of the funds budgeted in fiscal 21. The next slide, again, same format. We accumulate the costs, subtract fare revenues to see what's eligible. Then we take off our CARES Act. We have some other federal funds. We have advertising revenue for Valley Metro Rail. So the net costs that are funded by the member cities are just over $10 million for fiscal 21. So you can see the relief provided to the cities on local funding needed for rail service in fiscal 21. And the last slide here, just showing the allocation then. Costs are allocated for rail based on a track mileage basis. So we allocate the CARES Act based on track miles. So you can see the amount that's allocated to each of the cities supporting rail operations. So that was just a quick walk through the CARES Act. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Anybody have any questions?
Okay. If not, I want to talk briefly about some of the local revenues outlook. The Audit and Finance Subcommittee asked us to kind of reach out to the cities and get a feel for what's happening with local revenues, not just our regional Prop 400 revenues, to see how they're impacted by the pandemic. So we did that. We had responses from 10 cities, 10 of our members. We'd be happy to continue to take responses and continue to get updates. But our first look for the responses from those cities from back in May, June timeframe when budgets were being developed, that the cities were forecasting an average decrease. This is not a weighted average, just a straight average of the responses, a decrease of 2.6% in their revenues from the fiscal 20 actuals. Again, that was the budgeted amount. And there was a range there anywhere from an increase of 2.5% to a decrease, I believe 7% was the largest decrease. So a wide variety there, or a wide range, excuse me. But as we've seen for the first few months of fiscal 21, our revenues are actually coming in higher than anticipated. And that's pretty much true of all of the cities. And so we have a quick summary of some of the cities that have the dedicated sales taxes, looking at Glendale, Phoenix, and Tempe. For the first couple of months, the average, again, not a weighted average, just straight average, is about an increase of 4.1%. Our PTF revenues, Prop 400 revenues for the first 4 months, and we do have 4 months of revenues now, are up significantly, much higher than any of the other revenue sources. So we're about almost 11% above our fiscal 20 for the same time period. That's $5.7 million, and 9.6% above our budgeted amount. That's $5.1 million. So just last slide here, looking at it from in a graphical perspective. Again, those Glendale, Phoenix, and Tempe. You can see Glendale and Tempe were both forecasting reductions at various levels. Phoenix and our Valley Metro were forecasting slight increases. In all cases, those increases, the actual revenues coming in are higher than what was projected at various levels. You can see the 10% with the Prop 400 funds significantly higher than any of the other cities. But the point here really is that the revenue side is performing better than expected. If the revenues continue this way with the Prop 400, we would not expect to budget any service reductions for budget reasons next year. But again, to go back to what Mr. Methvin said during the study session, and we've heard from Councilmember Arredondo Savage, every city's budget situation is a little different. While it's positive that revenues are coming in a little higher than projected, that's still only half of the budget equation. So we will continue to work with the cities, with your staff to address each city's budget situation, whether it's service reductions, whether it's contingency planning in case our revenues take a turn for the worse and start declining. So we continue down this path to ensure that we can address all of the city's needs moving into fiscal 22. And the last point, we will continue to collect updated data from all the cities, report back to the AFS on the revenue situation and budget situation. Our service planning team continues to work with your cities and your staff to develop some of those contingency plans, and we'll keep the AFS updated. And the one question I did have, there was some question last month about discussing our budget situation, our budget planning for fiscal 22, perhaps at a study session in December. I'd like to recommend we do that in January, so we don't have to bring everyone in just for a study session, but also we'll have 6 months of revenue data for Prop 400 and hopefully 4 or 5 months from the local cities, and maybe get some input from other cities so we can get a better picture of the overall revenue situation in the region. We'll be a little farther down the road with our service planning team and looking at contingency planning. So I think January would be a better opportunity for us to provide a more detailed presentation to the board. But Mr. Chair, I'll leave that up to the board. If they preferred to keep December, we can do that, but I would recommend January. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I don't have a problem with doing a study session in January. Is there anybody else that has any comments or concerns of not having it in January? I don't hear any. So Scott, so let's go ahead and put that on a study session for January.
Okay, we'll do that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is that it for the COVID update, Scott?
I believe that's it. Just to reiterate what Paul said, right now, we're looking at where we are. We don't pretend to have a crystal ball looking forward, but I'm feeling much better about our overall financial situation than I did last March, April. We are not, at least the staff level, we are not now, just to reiterate, planning any service cuts for financial reasons based on our financial situation. But we are keeping a wary eye because we recognize that this could change given the current condition. It could change quickly. And so we are creating contingency plans, just like we did back in March and April. We're continuing service contingency plans in case the financial causes us to look at service changes due to financial reasons. We are always have the plan that we presented to you because we're always faced with the fact that because of the pandemic, we may have to adjust service for non-financial reasons, which mean workforce availability. And that's always a challenge for us. We have been so fortunate so far that our workforce has not been significantly impacted by the pandemic, but we always have a few people out here and there, and thank heavens that knock on wood that hasn't been hit hard, but that could change at any time. So just to let you know, we're taking a two-track mode to this. Financial purposes, we're holding the course because we don't see the need at this time, but we're developing contingency plans just in case. And on the non-financial, meaning the workforce and the service related, we continue to have our contingency plans in case we have pandemic-related challenges with putting service out. So that's the planning that we're going through right now related to COVID.
Perfect, thank you. Does anybody have any comments or questions?
I do, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Again, Stephen Methvin, City of Tempe. Mr. Smith, how do we go about making sure that our language is matching? I understand and agree with the way you phrase this, and that is Valley Metro is not making any service cuts for financial reasons. Tempe is making service cuts for financial reasons. And I just want to make sure that when we communicate our talking points that we use, that we don't confuse our ridership, because Tempe residents and residents from surrounding communities are going to see some changes to service in our city. So I'm asking for your help more than asking to change that. How do we make sure that our language matches?
That's a great question, Stephen. I appreciate that. And I think from the last I'm going to violate my own rule and undo the sorbet and go back to our Prop 400. I think one of the things that really jumped out at me is the nature of how we fund and determine our transit services. And what we've tried to do is realize that communication is a challenge. Valley Metro as an entity does not determine service levels around the valley, except for the routes and the funds that we control. And as you saw, only 30% of transit services in the valley are actually funded by Valley Metro. So when I say Valley Metro, I'm talking about our stewardship over that pot of money. And right now, we're fine with that pot of money. On the other hand, we have individual cities who cover the 70%. They do have a say in the service levels that we're providing. So when I use the word that's Valley Metro, it does get confusing. I'm talking about the entity of the Regional Public Transportation Authority and the money that we control. Our individual cities now will tell us what they can afford or what they're willing to pay or continue to pay as they're part of that 70%. So you brought up Tempe. If Tempe decides or is in a position where they need to reduce their portion, we, of course, as the service provider on a contract basis will adjust to meet the city's requests and requirements. That does create sort of a difference. And I'm hoping that for the public, I would not say this right now as a general statement to bus services Valley Metro, because it does not, to the public, because it doesn't speak for Phoenix either. All their buses are branded Valley Metro, but of course they are a separate operation. It's a challenge because I want to communicate to you, the board, as to what you control, as opposed to the overall transit system, which has multiple impacts coming in. And I agree with you, it creates the potential for confusion.
Yeah.
And we're going to do the very best we can to make sure that we don't, when we're talking to the public, my message would be different than what it was right here to you, the boards, because you have to decide on the pot of money that you control and how much we're going to put in. Each individual city has to decide what they're going to put in, and we have to mix those together to get a message to the public.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question, but it is a challenge.
It does, Mr. Smith. Thank you. I think that perhaps we could ask our staffs to work on something that, you know, all cities can agree to, especially those that are facing future reductions. Because it's a little inside baseball, and we all understand that. But when we're talking to the user of the transit system, you know, I think most view the transit system as something that's regionally managed, regionally funded, and not funded by both the region and pots of money. So if we could do that, I'll be fine.
Yeah, and we will work best. We have this challenge right now because of Phoenix and Valley Metro. And because obviously Phoenix and what they do in their council, and because of the way their governance is set up, the council gets involved in many decisions on operations for Phoenix Transit, whose buses are all branded Valley Metro. That of course gets a lot more media attention. And when the Phoenix City Council takes action, it only technically applies to the buses that are owned by the city of Phoenix, but obviously to the public, you know, Valley Metro is Valley Metro. And so we coordinate very closely with Phoenix staff to make sure as much as we can that we are not creating a difference of operation. Things such as front door boarding, what we're going to do for masks, all those things we coordinate a lot with the city of Phoenix, because we recognize that the potential for that message to get sort of distorted. We will do the same thing with your staff on service levels. And what goes out to the public, we will not make any unilateral statements. It will be not only us, it'll be Phoenix, it'll be Tempe and Goodyear and Mesa, whoever else has a say in this. And we've done a pretty good job, I think, so far with the cuts that we've had based on pandemic related items. I think I feel really proud of our staff and all your city staff for coordinating that. And I think we will be able to accomplish that going forward. The financial situation is a little different because as we have our discussions, we've also found that it's a difficulty because when we're treating this as a universe, we get at our level some really distorted discussions thinking that if Tempe's cutting, that means all of Valley Metro's cutting. So I agree with you. We do need to work and allow the service planners and our staff to do the majority of this work, because that's where they're sitting in the same room or at least on the same computer screen and having these discussions. And we'll coordinate with you as best we can to make sure the message to the public is a uniform message.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, does anybody else have any other questions?
Mr. Chair, this is Bill.
Yeah, Bill.
You know, I'm shocked by this conversation, and I really appreciate the question because it's really valid. We spend a tremendous amount of effort and money on the Valley Metro brand, and to try to split hairs between who's paying for the service reductions and whatnot, I find that just to be astonishing. We should not be disagreeing or splitting hairs about how we're going to manage this message. The end result, the last two sentences of this conversation were the most appropriate, and that's trying to work together to figure out how to message this. But this is the Valley Metro brand. And if Tempe decides to stop all of their bus service, that's going to have a huge impact on the Valley Metro brand. Just as the efforts of the city of Phoenix, rightfully so, has an impact on the entire Valley Metro brand. So when we as a board talk about operating a regional transit authority, holy smokes, this is the brand that we represent. So I guess beg that we don't try to differentiate or split hairs by, well, it's actually the city of Tempe who's cutting services, not Valley Metro. This is a big deal for all of us, and granted, the financial picture is not bad across the board, but Mr. And I may not pronounce your name correctly, Stephen. I'm sorry, Melvin or
Stephen's fine.
I'm not even going to try. To Stephen's
fine.
We need to worry about messaging this correctly, and I want to support that 110%.
Thank you for that. We have a great relationship in Tempe with Valley Metro, our staffs, our leadership. So I'm confident that we'll come up with the right messaging. And we often shorthand our conversation at the management committee level and certainly at the board level. But when we start to reach out to our transit users, we need to make sure we have a very consistent message, because you're 100% right. It gets to splitting hairs as to who's paying for what, because people just need to get from point A to point B. So thank you for the additional comments.
And Mr. Chair, if I might, if it makes you feel any better, I will tell you that when the pandemic first came around and we did do service adjustments, there was a lot of work done by our staff and your city staff to coordinate these, because as you can imagine, every city was looking at how do we handle this differently. And they all were looking at how will this drop in revenue affect us as an individual city. And our staff and your city staff did an amazing job in coordinating those changes, because there were differences in how cities approached it. And I think the fact that none of you really, when it came down to the public announcements, I didn't get any calls from anybody saying I'm confused. That shows you that we've been through this. We have been able to coordinate the message, and I'll just give our staff a great bit of credit for being able to bridge that gap between those things that are generated at the city staff level and Valley Metro staff and what the public hears. So we do have experience in this so far, knock on wood. Our staff's done a really good job of making sure the public is not confused, that we have a unified message going out. And so that if that gives you any comfort going forward, it does me, because we've been there and we've been successful at it. We just want to keep doing what we were doing right.
All right, thanks, Scott. Okay, so we're going to move on to audit item number 4, which is the audit and finance subcommittee update. Councilmember Stipp, I believe you're going to be presenting today.
That's correct, Mr. Chair. Thanks. Councilmember Arenado Savage put me on standby in the event that she couldn't make the meeting. So yeah, a lot of what Paul discussed really comes out of the conversations we've had at AFS. So at our last meeting, we looked at the responses provided by the member agencies that Paul discussed as we look forward to 2022, and each of the jurisdictions' financial positions, are significantly varied. The level of coordination, obviously, between Valley Metro and the cities is very important, because we recognize that in some cities we have lower than expected revenues. In other cities we have, higher revenue increases. So the discussion about the regional impact, we're taking this from a very cautious approach going into next year. While we are optimistic, as Scott and Paul are, we still are very guarded going into the budget, building the budget for FY22. So we're pursuing, and we've asked Paul and Scott to pursue a parallel path for the budget development that includes both the very optimistic projections, which we hope will hold, but also a less pessimistic revenue forecast going into it. So as the picture becomes clearer as we get into 2022, and now with this second wave that we are actually well prepared. I think the rest of the board can be very confident in what's happening both at AFS and with the staff in this parallel track. The other item that came up in AFS was we had deferred the merit increase. So the Audit and Finance Subcommittee motioned and unanimously recommended a 3% merit increase for the staff to become, that is effective January of 2021. The proposed increase would be permanent, obviously, for future budgets. We believe that this recommendation is a real good compromise, acknowledging the hard work and the commitment of the Valley Metro staff, while also being very fiscally responsible during a very uncertain economic climate. And that concludes my report.
Thanks, sir. Okay. Item number 5 would be the fiscal year 2021 first quarter budget review. Mr. Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to turn it back over to Paul. We wanted, since we do have now real numbers as it relates to the first quarter, we thought it would be prudent, and the Audit and Finance Subcommittee thought it would be prudent to share with you the actual results, just so you can get put numbers to the things we've been talking about sort of on a higher level as far as revenues and expenses. And I'll turn it over to Paul, who can go over the budget summary. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Chair, members of the boards, we went through a fairly detailed overview of the first quarter with the Audit and Finance Subcommittee. We have a lot of detail in your packet if you want to refer to it. The presentation that we have today really focuses more on operations. Capital budget is dependent particularly on when fleet arrives and we pay for it and how capital projects move on. But so we wanted to just highlight some of the results from operations. So if I could go quickly to RPTA, the first slide, looking at our sources of funds, the revenues, a couple of things I want to highlight. Looking at fare revenues, we came into the year knowing that with rear door boarding and not full fare enforcement, our fare revenue would be lower. It's significantly lower. And let me just backtrack for a second. The way we've presented the numbers here, first column is the full fiscal 21 annual budgeted amount. So if we look at fares, we're budgeted to receive just under $3 million. The fiscal 21 column is the first quarter actual, so at 522,000. The variance to the full annual budget and the percent received. So for us to be right on budget, that percent target would be 25%. So anything less than that on the revenue side is unfavorable, more would be favorable. So in this case, with fares at 18%, we're lagging behind even our reduced estimate for fiscal 21. We do hope that when the permanent operator barriers are installed on the buses sometime in early 2021, that we can get back to front door boarding and full fare enforcement, and that should help to bring those fare revenues back a little bit, but we are still significantly under where we would be under pre-COVID levels. So that's an area of concern, particularly moving forward to fiscal 22, when we won't have CARES Act funds to make up those lost fare revenues. And then the other line item, the public transportation funds, I touched on those previously. We are significantly over budget, ahead of budget on those revenues. Very optimistic, but as Vice Mayor Stipp said, it's a guarded optimism. We know that at some point that trend may not continue, especially with the second or third or whatever wave of COVID we have, that those revenues could start to decline. But as of now, that's an optimistic sign. So overall, our operating revenues at about 31% of the annual budget, which is well above where we would be for the first quarter. At a high level on our operating expenses, we're at about a 20%. So again, that's 20% of our annual budget. Our target would be 25 if we're right on budget. So we're under budget overall. And just looking at, if we go to the next slide, some of the key areas are fixed route operations. Operations services includes all of those services that we pay our contractors, First Transit, Total Transit, Transdev, ALC, First Transit, Total Transit on the fixed route side, on the paratransit below for Transdev and ALC. Those are all contractual and fuel. As you recall, we budgeted for a full return to pre-COVID levels for the full year, not knowing when we would. So it makes sense that we're a little under budget as we have not yet returned to full service levels. Just flipping to the next slide, our regional services, those are 100% covered by our regional Prop 400 tax. And the regional services include our customer service call center, marketing and public information, our mobility center and ADA certification offices, all those services that we provide on behalf of the region. We're well under budget for the first quarter at about 15% of our budget spent. Planning a little under budget. And going to the next slide, some of the other areas are admin and finance, commute solutions, and van pools, all under budget at this point through the first quarter. Looking quickly, high level at Valley Metro Rail, kind of the same format. If we look at our revenues, the big difference with Valley Metro Rail is that we don't have a dedicated tax source that comes directly into Valley Metro Rail. All of the funding comes either through RPTA and the Prop 400 or through the member cities. So we're generally on track. We're a little bit below, but a lot of these funding sources tend to lag a little bit because they're on a reimbursement basis, particularly the federal funds and the Prop 400 funds are all on a reimbursement. So it's not terribly concerning that we're below just because of that situation where revenues lag. Looking at the next slide on the overall operating budget with the different areas, we're about 18% spent. So we're also under budget on the operating side. And looking at next slide, some of those key areas for our light rail, O&M, operations and maintenance, and our light rail security, we're at about 19% spent on operations and maintenance. Again, we're not operating back at our full pre-COVID levels. We still have 15-minute headways and the changes in the span of service, so it makes some sense that we are under budget there. Light rail security did not adjust with the change in headways, so we're pretty much on target with our security there. And then the last slide, just looking at our planning, which is future project development, agency operating, under budget in both of those areas. So, Mr. Chair, it was just a very quick overview of our first quarter results. I'd be happy to answer any questions on those or any of the material that was in the packet before we move on.
Thanks, Paul. Is there anybody that has any questions? Okay, no questions that I can see. Okay.
All right.
So
Thank you.
I'm sorry, say again?
So we'll just move on to the next piece. In discussion of merit pay, as Vice Mayor Stipp mentioned in his AFS update. If you could go to the next slide. The board approved us to have a 3% merit pay in the budget. And that's based on performance from fiscal 20. But because of all the uncertainty, there was a request to have the AFS do a review of our first quarter results, which we did last week in a fair amount of detail. And the board asked the AFS to make a recommendation. And as Vice Mayor Stipp mentioned, the AFS voted unanimously to recommend that the 3% merit be awarded to staff effective January 1st of 2021. And with that, we would ask the board to consider and approve the AFS recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Mr. Chair, this is Lauren. I'd just like to clarify, and this is out of the staff report from the June board meeting, that there was a 3% placeholder put in the budget for salary increases, and this is the staff report. The budget revenues for the first quarter of fiscal year 21 will be reviewed with the financial working group and AFS in October. If AFS does not have sufficient information at that time, a second review in January would occur. The implementation of any salary changes would be dependent on review and recommendation by the AFS with final approval. So I want to clarify that there was no actual increase included in the budget. It was put in there as a placeholder to be discussed down the road. So just wanted to make sure that it's on record. That's exactly what the staff report in June said. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Comments? Okay. So at this time, I would request a motion and a second to approve the fiscal year 2021 first quarter budget.
Mr. Chair, this is Bill. I'll make the motion.
We have a motion. Thank you, Bill.
Second.
Suzanne Clapp, I'll second.
Thank you, Suzanne. So we have a first and a second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 8 would be the insurance coverage renewal, commercial property and liability of workman's compensation and employees' liability. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's in your packet. If you have any questions, we'll be Mike Manow, and we'll be more than happy to answer it. If you'd like a presentation, we can give it. There were a lot of questions and discussions at the staff level because of ever increasing, and I know each of your cities are dealing with insurance changes. So there were some changes that we have. If you'd like, we have Mike give you an overview of it. If not, we'll answer questions we have and just ask for approval.
I don't have any questions. Anybody have any questions? Okay, I don't see anything. So I'm going to request a motion and a second to authorize the CEO to purchase renewal coverage for Valley Metro commercial property and liability insurance coverage, including workman's compensation and employer's liability from December 1st, 2020 through November 30th, 2021, for the amount not to exceed $3,750,597. RPTA's obligation is $438,977. VMR's obligation is $3,311,620. Do I have a motion?
Councilmember Goodman, so moved.
We have a first. Do I have a second?
Second, this is Lauren.
We have a first and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I think that's working.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Item number 9 would be the cybersecurity program improvement and support. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll turn to Jim Hilliard to give a brief summary of what this item is. Jim?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members. Once again, Jim Hilliard, Valley Metro's Chief Administrative Officer. As the purpose statement notes, this item is to allow the CEO to contract for expertise necessary for Valley Metro's information security program to continue to be effective. I'd like to quickly touch on a little context of IT security in general, Valley Metro's program specifically, and then speak to the two types of expertise that this item provides, and then I'm happy to answer any members' questions. So first, IT security is one of the most important things that we do. I think Valley Metro, like all of your organizations and pretty much any public-facing entity today, is constantly being probed by hackers. We sort of exist in a reign of phishing attacks and malware and ransomware. And were any one of those to be successful, it would be a serious problem. We would not only be facing real financial costs, but potentially disruptions in service and a loss of public trust. So those are significant in and of themselves. However, in some respects, they're also the tip of the iceberg. So to receive federal funding from the FTA, Valley Metro must comply with the federal NIST security standards to be able to process credit cards through our TVMs. We have to comply with the payment card industry standards. And so were we to have a security incident that illustrated a failure to comply with either of those standards, we'd be looking at potentially more than $5 million a year in the losses due to the inability to process credit cards. And, as you just saw, tens of millions a year in potentially jeopardized FTA funds. Now, the good news is Valley Metro has an IT security program that works to prevent that from happening. We are a small agency, and so our IT security program is correspondingly small. It is comprised entirely of one FTE. That FTE's job is to bring the expertise to the agency so that everything that we do is being done with security in mind. That FTE also does investigations of potential security incidents, reviews logs, looking for evidence of exploits so we can block attacks before they're able to be successful. That's not uncommon for a small organization our size to have a small footprint. There are, however, a couple of risks that are inherent in a small program. The first is you're single-threaded. And so if you lose that expertise, your IT security program, for all intents and purposes, comes to a halt. And so, unfortunately, that's what happened earlier this year. Our lead security engineer was hired away. And that's critical because one of the things that makes IT security hard is it's very technical. So there is no one on Valley Metro staff that has the knowledge to simply step into that role. It's also urgent because IT security is one of those areas that is kind of a constant arms race, and there is an ongoing need to adapt to the latest viruses and the latest exploits that are being thrown at organizations. And then finally, it's challenging because it involves many, many different domains of the organization. So we could be great at network security, but eventually a staff member will click a link in a phishing email. That phishing email will compromise their credentials, and our network security won't matter a bit because they'll be bypassed, by that phishing attack. And so it's a case where we are only as good as our weakest link, and that lead engineer's job is to keep all of those pieces, working together all the time. So we're working diligently to refill that position, but they're very difficult to fill. They're in high demand, and we compete head-to-head with the private sector. And so until we're able to fill that position, we have to have IT security expertise to keep our program going. Without it, we are quite frankly flying blind. And this is not an area where flying blind is possible. It's just simply too great a risk. And so the first item in this memo contracts with a firm to provide us with the expertise that we need to keep our information security program operating until we're able to hire for that expertise once again. This assumes that we'll get that expertise hired by the end of April. If we're able to do that sooner, then the need for this will be correspondingly reduced. We will only use this authority until we're able to hire to backfill that position. The second risk associated with having a very small shop is you have all your eggs in one basket. And so if your expert, him or herself has a blind spot or simply makes a mistake, there's no one on staff that can say, I don't think that's the smartest way to do that, or maybe we're missing something here. And so the way that you mitigate that risk is by periodically bringing in experts to look at the program, to identify where we may have weaknesses, and then to recommend ways that we can address those weaknesses in both the most efficient and the most cost-effective fashion. And so that's exactly what the second part of this request does, is it brings in the same firm to do this assessment of where we stand and to help us understand what things we need to strengthen and how we can do that in the most cost-effective fashion. I'll just note that because this is, once again, not expertise that we have on board, either within Valley Metro's IT team or within our internal audit team, we're going to involve internal audit in this assessment. They will be a part of it from the beginning, and that we will make a joint presentation back to AFS on the findings of the assessment and the recommended next steps. And we'll treat it for all intents and purposes like an audit, where we work through the recommended mitigations in the month to come. So those are the two items before you, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Is there anybody have any questions?
Mr. Chair, this is Bill.
Yes, sir.
Just, this is too long to type, but I wanted to, first of all, thank Jim and the rest of the staff. I realize this was a contentious, for me anyway, issue last month, and I appreciate them looking at it, re-examining it, moving it forward at a reduced cost, and which then is a reduced scope. But I think it puts it much more in line with where we're headed. So I appreciate that effort. And I also want to thank my fellow board members for indulging me last month in this particular issue. It was after a robust conversation we had at AFS and then again last month, but I do appreciate the indulgence by my fellow board members. So thank you to staff and thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Bill. Anybody else? Okay, so I need a request for a motion and a second to authorize the CEO to purchase professional service from Knowledge Services to support and assess Valley Metro's information security program for an amount not to exceed $299,065. Do I have a motion?
Councilmember Goodman, so moved.
Thanks, sir. We have a second.
Second, Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, item number 10 would be the quarterly reports. Mr. Smith.
Mr. Chair, these are here for your information. Unless there's any, unless there's any questions, we have no presentation.
Anybody have any questions? Okay. Number 11 will be the travel expenditures and solicitations. This item is presented for information only. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none. Item number 12 would be the future agenda items and requests for current events. Is there any member that has any items that they would like to place on a future agenda or anything that they'd like to talk about in the, about committees?
Chair,
Yes, sir.
I would just like to congratulate the Wolf on his retirement and wish him a great retirement.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Roland, for bringing that up. Wolf Grote, those of you know, has been with us, and whether through the City of Phoenix and Valley Metro, been involved in public transportation for well over 30 years, and his fingerprints are all over our system, and we're so grateful for the legacy he leaves, and wish him the best as he retires at the end of the year. So thank you for bringing that up, Roland.
Thank you, Roland. Yes.
Okay, and this is Jack Sellers. I'd just like to wish Audra a happy birthday.
That we didn't know. Thank you, Jack. And Mr. Chair, I have one more thing. I failed to mention, and unfortunately he had to leave early, but Councilmember Jared Taylor from the town of Gilbert, this is also his last meeting. He was with us not just a short while, but we appreciate his involvement. He's leaving the town council in January, and like I said, he had to leave. But if you see Councilmember Taylor, thank him. We'll make sure that we let him know that we are grateful for his service on the Valley Metro Board also. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, item number 13 would be our next meeting. Our next meeting for the board is scheduled on Wednesday, January 21st. Actually, is it supposed to be Wednesday or should it be Thursday?
It's Thursday.
Thursday, January 22nd at 11:15. And with that, we are adjourned.
And
Thank
to
you,
everyone,
everyone.
we have no RPTA meeting
We will roll right into Valley
this month.
Metro.
So those of you in RPTA, you have fulfilled your duty, and we'll wait for VMR. We'll roll right into the VMR meeting. So all of you in RPTA are free to go.
Chair Heredia, we can begin whenever you're ready.
Sounds good. Thank you. I think people are still logging off. All right. Why don't we convene and welcome to Valley Metro Board meeting for November. Item 1 on the agenda, public comment for today's meeting. Public comment is being taken in written format and will be entered into the official minutes of the meeting. So moving on to item 2, minutes from the October 22nd, 2020 board meeting presented for approval. Request a motion and a second to approve the board minutes.
Move approval.
Any second?
Mr. Chair, Stephen Methvin, Tempe. I'm happy to second if there's not a board member available to do it.
All right, and second, I don't see anybody else.
I need to verify.
there's something.
Mayor Harkey, are you still on the line? No, Mayor Harkey is not in attendance, so it is Tempe, Phoenix, and Mesa in the meeting today. So the second from Stephen.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right. Anybody against the motion? I think it passes, right? So.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Item 3 on the consent agenda. Items are listed on the consent agenda for approval. Anything that y'all want to remove from the consent agenda? Hearing none, request another motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
We've been very excited about the work HDR is doing, so move approval of consent agenda.
Second.
Mr. Chair, it's Stephen from Tempe. I just would like to ask Mr. Manow, is a proxy able to vote on rail? I just want to make sure.
Yes, Chair, Mr. Methvin, thank you for the question. Of course, the concern, we always want to make sure that we don't have to come back at a later meeting and go through any ratification process. In this instance, you've been elected by or selected as the qualified representative for Ms. Arredondo Savage, and so in this instance, your vote is fine.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Manow. So I will second the mayor's motion.
All right. Anyone against the motion in a second? Hearing none, motion passes. Item number 4, future agenda items. Any of us have any agenda items for future meetings? Hearing none, I think that's it for the agenda. Next meeting is Thursday, January 21st, 11:15 a.m. Thank you.
Thanks to all. Happy holidays.
Hey, thank
Happy
you.
holidays.
Bye-bye.